Welcome back, sinners. And today, we're going to be diving into The Conjuring, a 2013 film directed by James Wan, starring Vera Farmiga, Patrick Wilson, Sterling Jarrett, and Ron Livingston as Bathsheba from the Conjuring universe. Our movie begins with a close-up of a creepy doll, while two nurses narrate their disturbing story to the specialist. Sometime in the past, the doll moved its limbs and body and changed locations in the house on its own. The experts wonder if someone might have had the apartment key and pranked them, but the nurses are adamant that the doll is possessed since a medium told them the story of Annabelle Higgins, a girl who was so lonely that her spirit now lives inside the doll. The nurses say that one night, they came home and found the doll seated in the hallway with some crayons, but they had left it in the spare room earlier. They say the room was completely trashed with "Miss Me" written on the ceiling. When suddenly the red crayon begins rolling independently, the nurses freak out, pick up the doll, and proceed to toss it in the dumpster. Later that night, they hear loud hammering on their door. When they open the door in terror, there is no one there except a letter that reads, "Miss Me," in red. The nurse finds the doll looking back at her as she hears a knocking from within the home. They explain to the specialist that they have tried everything to get rid of the doll but have had no success. But they clarify that this is not the work of a ghost, but rather a more potent demonic inhuman spirit. The experts explain that demonic spirits don't possess objects. Instead, they intend to occupy a human host to live on in our world. The preceding scenes were taken from a videotape, and we are now in the present inside an auditorium. Numerous pupils inquire about the doll and are informed that she is in a secure location. The professionals identify themselves as demonologists or paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed is the only demonologist acknowledged by the Catholic Church. Lorraine is a gifted clairvoyant whose abilities have saved countless lives. The scene shifts to Harrisville, Rhode Island, 1971, where the Perrons, a family with 5 children, are relocating to a new house in the middle of nowhere. While their younger children begin exploring the enormous antiquated mansion, their eldest daughter is upset to be there since she prefers their previous home. Sadie, the dog, waits on the porch and refuses to enter the house despite the father trying to drag her in. Later, the whole family pitches in to help unload the truck and bring the furnishings inside. One of the little girls, Cindy, hangs a wind chime outdoors, while her younger sister, April, calls for her after discovering an ancient music box close to the enormous tree in the backyard. That night, the kids play Blind Man's Buff, where a blindfolded person tries to find his friend by listening to their claps. The blinded sister, Nancy, eventually locates her sister, Christine, but in the process breaks one of the wooden boards on the basement stairs. The father, Roger Perron, looks into it and discovers a mysterious cellar below. He decides to explore it and finds a lot of antiques, a piano, old guns, and junk. He decides to search it in the morning and warns his kids from coming down there. Later that evening, Roger and Carolyn celebrate moving into their new home while Sadie barks madly outside. In the morning, while getting breakfast, the mom notices a strange bruise on her leg, and everyone remarks on how cold the home is. The eldest daughter comments that her room smells strange, something akin to rotten eggs. The mother also observes that the time throughout the home is mysteriously stuck at 3:07. She joins her husband Roger to search the cellar for antiquities they could pawn. Carolyn notices that the kitchen clock has likewise struck 7 minutes past 3. Outside, April looks for Sadie and suddenly shrieks at the sight of their dead dog. Oh no, not the dog! Back at the Warren household, Ed gives a reporter a tour of the relics they have gathered from previous demonic incidents. The man inquires if Annabelle is present, so Ed shows it to him and explains what a demonic conduit is and the measures he and his wife take to keep their distances from these energies. He warns him not to touch anything. Ed's daughter, Judy, is seen in the room looking weary at Annabelle, while the journalist snoops about Lorraine's condition. Ed warns his daughter to stay away from this room. Later, Ed offers Lorraine some coffee as she advises him to quit blaming himself, referring to an earlier argument concerning the exorcism's toll on Lorraine's health. We cut back to Sadie, who has been laid to rest at home, and the clock once more stops at 3:07 a.m. One of the daughters feels something grip her and believes her sister Nancy is playing a practical joke on her until Nancy reveals that she wasn't the one who did it. Back downstairs, Roger awakens to a loud bang, followed by a door opening and creaking. He hears the thump again, but assumes it's the wind since the window is open. Roger heads back upstairs as he is caught by surprise by his daughter Andrea to find Cindy sleepwalking upstairs. She bangs her head against the closet until her father takes her back to bed. The next day, Carolyn discovers a new bruise on her shoulder blade, and a pigeon collides with the house and dies. The kids leave for school, leaving Mom to find her youngest, April, talking to an imaginary friend called Rory. The little girl says she can see Rory behind her in a mirror when the music stops. The two decide to play hide and clap, and while Mom is searching, the grandfather clock chimes. After hearing a few claps, the mother enters the eldest daughter's room. The closet opens, so the mom asks for the third clap, and someone claps from within the cabinet. The mom thinks she has caught April, but her daughter emerges from the corridor behind her. Terrified, the mom searches the closet but finds nothing. Sometime later, Roger accepts a weekly night job for half his typical pay rate because they need cash. Something pulls Christine's leg again, and she believes it to be Nancy once more. It pulls harder again, waking her up. She searches fearfully beneath the bed, but finds nothing. The door creaks, then a foul smell emanates. There's someone behind the door. She wakes Nancy and asks whether she has seen it. Nancy says there is nothing, walking over to the door, her back against, and proves it. But suddenly, the door closes shut behind her. The sisters shriek, waking up the whole house. Christina says the entity wants her family dead, but her parents reassure her that it's all a bad dream. In the next scene, Ed and Lorraine visit a would-be haunted house. However, it turns out the owners are just as paranoid as the piping system, and the place is simply run down. So it creaks and strains under rough winds. Back at the Perrons, things have gotten worse. Carolyn finds multiple bruises covering her body, and at night, she hears giggling and clapping way past the girls' bedtime. She investigates and finds all the girls sound asleep in their beds. Suddenly, all the family pictures fall and the frames shatter on the staircase. "Oh hell nah, y'all trying to get me killed down here." The clock tolls, and someone claps from the basement, forcing her to check it out. She threatens to lock the person pranking her in the basement. Out of nowhere, the door closes, smacks her head, and sends her tumbling. As she regains her composure, someone drops a ball and then shatters the light bulb, which freaks Carolyn out. She lights a match, but someone snuffs it out, clapping behind her. She is locked in the basement, screaming for help, but no one comes. Back upstairs, Cindy begins banging her head on her sister's closet, so Andrea tucks her in. Shockingly, someone bangs from inside the closet. Andrea slowly walks to it, opening it, but finds nothing. Cindy looks above the closet and both sisters scream when a fiendish woman leaps from the closet and attacks them. It's the entity. Roger, now back from work, rushes home at the desperate cries of his family. He releases his wife from the basement and then consoles Andrea, who's fighting some invisible presence on top of her. We cut back to Ed and Lorraine in a conference, where they explain the 3 stages of demonic possession: infestation, oppression, and possession. They display a video of a man who shot his wife and ended it all, despite the utmost effort to exorcise him. Ed says infestation is simply feeling and hearing another presence, while oppression is an exerted demonic force on the weakest psyche in a household to prepare it for possession. Carolyn Perrin is part of the audience, and after the lecture, she urges the duo to help her family. Ed and Lorraine visit the parents and meet the family. The family is huddled downstairs in a state of general unease. Ed roams the home for a moment and comments about rancid smells being a prime indicator of a demonic presence. When Ed asks about the doors, Roger explains how he has tied the doors shut because at night they keep hearing 3 bangs, which Ed explains are a mocking gesture to the Trinity. Carolyn says the old closet belonged to the previous owner of the house, the same with the cellar and all the items there. This piques Lorraine's interest, so she ventures down, using her clairvoyant abilities, and discovers that something terrible has happened to the previous owners of the house. Ed and Lorraine rally the family and begin recording their interview. Lorraine tries to see Rory via the music box, and surprisingly, she sees the reflection of a boy on the window. She then walks among the property and checks the old tree outside and discovers that someone hung themselves there. Having collected enough evidence, the Warrens conclude that the entity has latched itself to the family, and the house will need an exorcism. To perform one, they must collect more evidence for the church, which the entity might not like. The Warrens ask the family to get baptized to reduce the demonic effects. Back at home, Ed and Lorraine's daughter expresses how much she misses them. She offers her mom a locket with their photos so they can always be together. A bit later at night, Ed makes a startling discovery. The recordings of Roger and Carolyn have no audio, as if the entity blocked the whole thing. While discussing the missing audio, Lorraine uncovers the identity of the previous owners, a woman with close ties to witchcraft who got hanged at Salem. Her husband raised her child and married another woman. The stepmother was later found trying to sacrifice the child in the fireplace and even ended it all, stating no one could take her land. The time of death was 307. Years later, the farmland was divided and sold, but most owners suffered freak accidents and lost their lives. Ed's tape suddenly plays, and they hear the wheezing and then the wailing of a woman. The next day, the Warrens recruit Officer Brad and Technician Drew to proof the house with cameras, bells, and thermostats. Ed exclaims to Roger that when the temperature drops, the cameras will snap a photo as he sets up cameras out in their backyard. Cutting back to Lorraine and Carolyn, she is told the witch's story about how the witch would willingly sacrifice a child, explaining that to them they believe it elevates their status in the eyes of Satan. Lorraine, sensing Carolyn's distress, tries to discuss the photo she holds in her hand as she recalls the memory of their family blissfully gathering to take a beautiful photo together at the beach. Ed is later seen beginning to place crosses around the house to irritate the entity. Not too long after, the cellar door creaks and the cameras take a picture. Lorraine, Ed, and Officer Brad take their equipment below to investigate. Ed attempts to invite the entity to communicate, but it refuses. With no success, they begin to leave the cellar. The entity emerges and angrily closes the door shut behind them. In the morning, the family experiences a reprieve as they feel safe with law enforcement, Lorraine, and Ed in the house. Lorraine confesses that she finds the family lovely and has developed an emotional attachment. As she's hanging laundry, the wind then shifts and sends the laundry flying, but for a mere second, the drapes cover a shape in front of Lorraine and reveal a person staring at her from Carolyn's window. Lorraine hastily begins making her way to Carolyn, sensing she's in danger. Carolyn is found sleeping when she is pinned down on the bed and the entity vomits ooze into her mouth in an attempt for possession. When Lorraine arrives in a panic, she hears retching from the next room as she bangs on the bathroom door. She confronts Carolyn, but she acts normal and dismisses any problem and quickly rejoins her family. Back in the backyard, Ed works on the old Chevy, while Roger expresses gratitude for their help. Ed confesses that this is mostly Lorraine's hard work. He explains to Roger that when they're helping a family struggling with demonic entities, Lorraine is capable of sensing and feeling things that help others, but it does take a toll on her. He explains to Roger that after their last mission, Lorraine isolated herself without food or water for 8 days, given the intensity of the events that had occurred. At night, Officer Brad hears the wind chime tinkling. Upon investigating, he finds nothing, so he goes back in. A pale woman with mangled arms confronts him and yells, "Look what she made me do!" He follows the woman into the adjacent room when he is suddenly thrown back as the apparition catches him off guard, putting him on his ass. The house is rattled, and Cindy begins sleepwalking while the cameras take frenetic photos of her, indicating something is with her. Cindy walks up to her room, and the door locks behind her. Drew and Lorraine use his machine to overhear a boy showing Cindy his hiding place to keep her safe. The men break the door but can't find Cindy anywhere. Ed pleads to Officer Brad to bring a UV light. He quickly makes his way to Drew, demanding one, bringing it back to Ed shortly thereafter. Using Drew's UV light, they follow the footsteps leading to the closet and discover a secret passage where Cindy lies unconscious. Ed rescues the girl, and April tells Lorraine that this is the place where Rory used to hide from his mother. Lorraine goes in and places Rory's music box next to his ancient toys. She finds a rope tied to a noose. The decrepit floorboards suddenly break, and Lorraine falls through, crashing into the cellar. Lorraine hears a woman sobbing, so she uses the music box and the flashlight to see her. The woman appears pained, saying, "She made me do it." Then another body tied up attacks Lorraine, forcing her to flee the attic and lose her daughter's locket in the process. A frantic Lorraine has pieced it all together. The entity possesses mothers and makes them kill their children, which is why she's been feeding on Carolyn, leaving her with bruises and preparing her to end the 5 girls. The house begins to rumble at the words, crosses drop on the floor, and Nancy is hurled around and then dragged by her hair until Lorraine is able to cut it, seemingly freeing her. The exacerbated situation forces Roger to take the children away and seek refuge at a church, while Ed will present the evidence to get an exorcist. As they pack to leave, Lorraine overhears her daughter, Judy, calling from the lake. She finds her drowning, but it's only a vision, a warning for Lorraine to stay away. At the church, Ed and Lorraine speak with a priest, but since the family is not baptized, nor church members, he explains to them that the Vatican itself must approve of the exorcist. However, Ed urges the priest to act fast due to the severity of this possession and all the kids involved. Back at the Warren household, something begins to tug at Judy's leg as she sleeps, and her locket spins erratically, mirroring her mother's, which was left in the entity's basement. Judy searches for her parents, but no one is there. We find out Annabelle is missing from her case, and the house begins to bathe in darkness, forcing Judy to retreat to her room as someone bangs loudly on her door. She finds a woman holding Annabelle on the rocking chair. A terrified Judy calls for her Nana, but she is too late until Ed and Lorraine make it home just in time to save her. Roger, upon returning back to the church housing, is frantically greeted by his girls, as he's told by them that their mother has taken April and Christine hostage and are returning back to the mansion, most likely possessed at this point. He calls Ed, and they devise a plan to reunite there with Officer Brad. Ed attempts to leave without Lorraine, but she refuses to let Ed go alone, despite his worrying about her safety. Back at the mansion, Officer Brad shoots the door open and leads the group to the cellar, just in time to stop Carolyn from stabbing Christine. When they try to get Carolyn out of the house, her body begins to flare with bruises. "She'll kill her if she leaves the house," Lorraine explains. Suddenly, Carolyn is dragged back in, shrieking Roger's name in a demonic voice down into the cellar. Christine is locked away for her safety while Drew searches for April. Downstairs, Carolyn attacks her husband, chokes Ed, slashes Brad's cheek, and is uncontrollable until Lorraine wraps her with drapes and has the men tie her to a chair. Carolyn's muffled screams fill the house, and Ed realizes the priest won't make it in time. Thus, he has to perform the exorcism before it is too late. Lorraine brings him a Bible while Drew continues his search for April. Suddenly, a bird crashes into the car, followed by a flock that begins to flurry around the house. Downstairs, rattled by the prayer and holy water sprayed on Carolyn, who begins to scream in agony and forces the group to hold her still. Ed reads the sacred Latin words and refuses to relent, so the entity calls for Roger's help using Carolyn's voice. Ed orders it to reveal itself, so it complies by showing its grotesque face through blood-splattered drapes. Immediately, the chair levitates, flips, and starts banging against the ceiling. Ed and Roger compel her to free Carolyn, but she responds by saying that Carolyn is already gone and they're all going to die. Drew, shortly after, yells that he has found April under the kitchen boards. Upon hearing this, Carolyn escapes her captors and searches through the tunnels, aiming for April. She apprehends her daughter and is about to stab her with scissors, but Ed calls the entity with her real name, Bathsheba, and condemns her to hell. Simultaneously, Lorraine appeals to Carolyn by reminding her of her children and that pleasant day on the beach. With their efforts coalescing and Carolyn's willpower and love for her family, the entity is expunged. Carolyn retches the vile presence, and her eyes begin to revert to their old gleam. She looks up at her youngest daughter, happy and apologetic. Later, a battered and bruised Carolyn is escorted out of the house as her daughters and husband join her. Lorraine and Ed proudly hug on the porch, realizing their hard work has paid off. April comes while they are on the porch returning Judy's locket back to Lorraine. In the final scene, the Warrens go home. Ed places the music box with the rest of the cursed artifacts they've collected from previous cases. When they close the door, the music box starts playing on its own as the film fades to black.